The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, the kind of place designed to impress. Sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, striping the conference table in sharp lines. I sat at one end of it, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the quiet shuffle of papers. This was supposed to be closure. After months of grief, today was the day we would hear my father's last wishes. My brother Michael sat across from me, arms folded, his face carved into a mask of practiced calm. Always so sure of himself, always so ready to play the golden child. Our younger sister Sarah sat beside me, nervously twisting her necklace. Unlike me, she had no expectations. She was just here to see the process through. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison was very clear in his directives, he began, his voice measured. He wanted his estate divided in a way that reflected his trust in each of you. I straightened in my seat. Dad and I had spent years together, side by side in the family business. He used to tell me, "You have the mind of a leader, Anna. You'll carry this legacy forward." Those words weren't just compliments. They were promises. The lawyer continued. The Harrison estate, including the company's shares, properties, and investments, will be entrusted to Michael Harrison as primary heir and executor. Certain liquid assets will be provided to Sarah Harrison. As for Anna Harrison, my chest tightened as his eyes flicked toward me, then back to the document. A trust has been set up in your name with a modest sum. Specific details are enclosed in the final documentation. For a second, the words didn't make sense. A modest sum? No company shares? No stake in the properties I had helped manage for years? My throat went dry. Michael leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's what Dad wanted," he said smoothly, too smoothly. I felt the blood rush to my face. "That's impossible. Dad wouldn't, he told me..." My voice cracked. "He promised I'd be part of this." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but offered no solace. "The documents are signed, notarized, and legally binding." My hands trembled. I couldn't stop staring at Michael. He avoided my gaze, instead drumming his fingers lightly on the table like a man waiting for applause. It hit me in that moment. He had done something. Manipulated. Twisted. Stolen. Sarah whispered, "Anna, maybe Dad just thought Michael was more..." Her words trailed off. She couldn't even finish the lie. I rose abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "No, this isn't right." My voice was sharp, echoing in the heavy silence. "I know Dad. He would never cut me out like this. Not unless someone made him." Michael's eyes finally met mine. Cold, calculated. "Careful what you're suggesting," he said, his tone low and dangerous. I walked out of that office with my fists clenched, my vision blurred with rage. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't shock. It was betrayal. My own brother had stolen everything I had worked for, everything my father had wanted me to continue. But here's what Michael didn't understand. He might have the papers, the signatures, the smug satisfaction of winning the game for now. But I wasn't going to stay quiet. If he thought I'd let him rewrite our father's legacy without a fight, he was dead wrong, because this was no longer about inheritance. This was war. He thought the will was the end of the story, but for me, it was just the beginning. The drive home from the lawyer's office was a blur of streetlights and fury. I don't even remember the turns I made, only the rhythm of my heartbeat pounding like a drum in my ears. Every memory of my father's words, every late night we spent reviewing business plans together, flashed before me like a cruel joke. All of it, erased with a few strokes of ink on a will that didn't make sense. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my anger had hardened into something sharper. Questions. Why would Dad suddenly decide to trust Michael with everything when it had always been me at his side? Why was the language in that will so cold, so impersonal, so unlike him? I unlocked the front door and tossed my keys onto the counter, pacing the living room like a caged animal. My father was meticulous. He didn't leave things unfinished, didn't make rash decisions, and yet, this will had appeared like it had been typed by a stranger. I pulled out my laptop and began searching through my old emails. Over the years, Dad had shared countless notes, drafts, and thoughts about the future of the company. I knew what he wanted and I needed proof. Hours passed as I sifted through correspondence, business updates, reminders, words of encouragement. And then, there it was, an email from 6 months ago. The subject line read, "For when the time comes." My breath caught as I clicked it open. His words scrolled across the screen. "Anna, I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. If anything ever happens to me, you'll have the company. Michael is brilliant in his own way, but you're the one with the head and heart to carry this forward. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Tears stung my eyes, but rage quickly replaced them. 6 months ago. That was barely before Dad's health started to decline. He hadn't changed his mind. He hadn't decided I was unworthy. This was proof. Something had happened between then and the reading of that will. Something, or someone, had interfered. I thought of Michael, his smug expression in the lawyer's office, the way he avoided my eyes until the very last second. My gut screamed the truth. He had gotten to Dad's documents, maybe even coerced changes in those final weeks. The next morning, I visited Sarah. She lived in a small townhouse across town, her place cluttered with books and half-finished crafts. She opened the door with wide, worried eyes. "Anna, are you okay? You left so fast yesterday." I stepped inside, clutching a folder of printed emails. "Sarah, listen to me. That will isn't real. At least not in the way Dad intended." Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "You heard the lawyer." I spread the emails across her coffee table, pointing to the highlighted lines. "Look at this. Dad wrote this months ago. He wanted me to take over. He trusted me with the business. This new will, it doesn't add up." Sarah's lips parted as she scanned the pages. "Oh my God." She sank onto the couch. "Do you really think Michael?" "I don't think." I cut her off. "I know." She looked torn, twisting her necklace like she always did when nervous. "But what can you do? If the will is signed and notarized, then I find out how it got that way." My voice was steady now, colder than I'd ever heard it. "People leave trails. Documents, witnesses, slip-ups. Michael isn't as perfect as he thinks he is. And when I find proof, I'll expose him." Sarah hesitated, then whispered, "You're serious?" I met her gaze. Dead serious. That night, lying awake in my bed, I realized the scale of what I was stepping into. This wasn't just a fight for money or titles. This was about legacy, about my father's faith in me, about not letting my brother erase me from the story we both lived. Michael had stolen my inheritance on paper. But paper burns, and I was ready to light the first match. He thought a forged signature would silence me. But every lie leaves a shadow, and I was about to chase his into the light. I remember that night as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing against your chest. Everyone was asleep, or at least pretending to be. But I wasn't. I was lying awake, my mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Why had my father left everything to my brother David? Why did my mother just nod silently at the lawyer's words, as though she had known all along? Something didn't feel right. So I slipped quietly out of bed, moving carefully across the creaky floorboards of my childhood home. The moonlight poured through the tall windows, lighting my path as though it, too, wanted me to find the truth. My father had always kept important documents in his study. If there was an answer, I was certain it would be hidden there. The door to the study groaned when I pushed it open. The air inside smelled faintly of old books, cedarwood, and dust. I had been in this room countless times before, but that night everything felt different, charged, almost electric. I walked to the big mahogany desk, my fingertips brushing its polished surface. At first, I found nothing unusual, just neat stacks of papers, his fountain pen, and a leather notebook filled with half-finished thoughts. But then my eyes caught something, a small, almost invisible seam at the back of the desk drawer. My heart pounded as I pressed it. The wood gave way, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, folded carefully in an envelope, was another will. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook as I pulled it out, my eyes racing across the words. This will was dated only 6 months before his death. And in it, my father had left the estate to me, not David, to me. Every asset, every piece of land, every share of the company, it all should have been mine. So why had the lawyer read a different document? Why had the family pretended like this version didn't exist? I sank into the chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. My own family had hidden this from me. My brother had stolen my birthright, and my mother had allowed it. The air in the study felt colder then, darker, and for the first time I understood this wasn't a mistake. It was a conspiracy. I tucked the will back into the hidden drawer, careful to return everything as it was. If David or my mother suspected I knew, it would ruin everything. I had to be smart. I had to be patient, but from that moment on, a fire burned inside me. I would not let them destroy me. They thought I was weak, too emotional, too trusting. But they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. And as I walked back to my room, a plan began to take shape. If my family wanted to play games, then I would play too. Only this time, I would be the one pulling the strings. Because I wasn't just going to reclaim what was mine. I was going to make them pay for every lie, every whisper, every betrayal. The stage was set. And they didn't even know it yet. They thought the secret was safe, hidden behind polished wood and forged papers. But they had no idea the moment I found that will. Their end had already begun. From that night forward, every glance, every smile at the breakfast table felt like a dagger in my chest. My brother David sat across from me, sipping his coffee, tapping away at his phone, acting like the master of the house. My mother, ever poised, ever controlled, looked at me as if I were a guest, not her daughter. But they didn't know what I knew. And that gave me power. I wasn't reckless. No. I had learned the hard way that rage left unchecked could destroy a person before it destroyed their enemies. I kept my voice calm, my demeanor sweet, even when my insides twisted with fury. They thought I had accepted my fate. They thought I had moved on. But secretly, I was laying the foundation for my revenge. The first move came quietly, almost invisibly. I started visiting my father's old business partners. One by one, I asked polite questions, slipping into conversations about contracts, shares, and the future of the company. At first, they treated me like a grieving daughter trying to hold on to memories. But I knew better. These men respected strength, and as I revealed what I knew, my father's plans for me to inherit, they began to see me differently. It wasn't long before whispers began to ripple through the business world. Had David really inherited the company legitimately? Or was something darker at play? I fed those whispers carefully, strategically, never too much at once. Just enough to plant doubt. At home, I played my part. I let David brag about his brilliant leadership. I let my mother pour tea and smile smugly when relatives congratulated them on the family's good fortune. I smiled too, nodding, laughing at the right moments. Because sometimes the best weapon is patience, but make no mistake, I wasn't idle. At night, I studied every page of my father's will. Both of them. The forged one and the real one. I compared signatures, handwriting, dates. I even hired a discreet handwriting expert under the guise of archiving family documents. His conclusion was exactly what I needed. The first will, the one naming David as heir, was a forgery. When I held that report in my hands, I felt my father's presence. It was as if he was telling me, fight for what is yours. Expose them. Still, I knew better than to rush into court. My family had power, money, and connections. If I went straight for the throat, they'd crush me. No, I needed to bleed them slowly, piece by piece, until the world saw the truth without me ever having to scream it. The first crack came at a charity gala. David was giving a speech, boasting about expanding the company and honoring our father's legacy. I stood at the edge of the room, champagne glass in hand, watching. Then, with a sweet smile, I approached one of his investors, a man I had spoken to privately weeks earlier. I leaned in just loud enough for others to overhear and said, "Funny, isn't it? How my father's last wishes seemed to disappear overnight." The words hung in the air like smoke. I walked away before he could respond, leaving him with the seed I had planted. By the end of the evening, David's smile was tighter. He had noticed the shift, the way people whispered when he passed, the way certain investors avoided his eye. He didn't know why yet, but he felt it, and that was exactly what I wanted. Because revenge isn't just about striking once. It's about letting your enemy realize slowly that the ground beneath them is crumbling. And there's nothing they can do to stop it. That night, lying in bed, I thought of my father. I remembered his voice, his steady presence. For the first time since his death, I felt like I was fighting beside him, not just for him. This wasn't just my battle. It was ours. The first whispers had started, and once doubt takes root, it grows like wildfire. David thought he was untouchable, but soon he would learn just how wrong he was. Doubt is a funny thing. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps, it whispers, it gnaws at the edges of certainty until even the strongest facade begins to tremble. And that's exactly what I saw happening to David. Within days of the gala, I noticed subtle changes in him. His phone calls became longer, his tone sharper. He snapped at assistants, cursed under his breath when he thought no one was listening. He poured himself one too many whiskeys at dinner. That confident swagger he wore like armor was starting to crack, and I savored every second of it. But I knew the real battle was only just beginning. One afternoon, I walked into the family home's library. The room smelled of polished wood and old secrets. My mother was there, sitting in my father's leather chair, a position she had never dared to take while he lived. She looked regal, commanding. But when her eyes met mine, they were sharp as knives. "You've been busy?" she said, her voice calm but heavy with accusation. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Busy? I'm not sure what you mean." She set down the book in her hands. It wasn't a book at all, but one of my father's old ledgers. "Don't play coy with me. I hear things. You've been talking to people. Important people. People who should be loyal to David." My heart raced, but outwardly I smiled. "Isn't it funny, Mother, how loyalty shifts when truth comes to light?" For a moment, the mask slipped from her face. Her lips tightened, her eyes narrowed. There it was, the first hint of fear. She quickly composed herself, but I had seen it. And once you see fear in your enemy, you never forget it. "I'll give you some advice, darling," she said coldly. "Don't dig too deep. Sometimes the past is better left buried." Her words sent a chill through me. Buried. Did she know about the real Will? Or was this just her way of keeping me in line? Either way, I realized something crucial that day. My mother wasn't just a passive player in this. She was part of the scheme. That night, as I sat in my room, I thought about her words. If she had truly helped David forge the will, then her hands were as dirty as his. And that meant she would fall with him. But timing was everything. I couldn't reveal my hand too soon. Instead, I decided to deepen the cracks already forming. The next step was public. I arranged to meet with a journalist I trusted, someone who owed me a favor from years back. Over coffee in a quiet corner of a cafe, I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of both Will's and the handwriting expert's report. "I'm not asking you to publish this," I said. "Not yet. But I want you to start digging, quietly, and when the time is right, I'll give you the rest." The journalist nodded, eyes gleaming with the thrill of a scoop. "If what you're saying is true, this will be explosive," I smiled. "Oh, it's true. And when it comes out, the world will know exactly who David and my mother really are." Walking out of that cafe, I felt lighter. I was no longer just reacting. I was controlling the narrative. Back at home, the atmosphere was different. Tense. Charged. David avoided my gaze at dinner. My mother's smile seemed forced. I could feel their suspicion growing, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And then, it happened. Late one evening, I overheard them in the study. Their voices were low, Urgent. She knows, David hissed. I don't know how much, but she knows. She doesn't have proof, my mother snapped. If she did, she'd have used it by now. She's dangerous, David said. We need to handle her before she ruins everything. I pressed my hand to my chest, steadying my breath. They thought they could handle me. Little did they know, the noose was already tightening, around their necks, not mine. They wanted to silence me. But by the time they realized the depth of my plan, it would already be too late. The cracks in their empire were growing, and soon the whole facade would come crashing down. Desperation is a dangerous perfume. It lingers in the air, clings to the skin, and no matter how hard you try to wash it away, it betrays you. That week, both David and my mother wore it. I could see it in their eyes, darting glances across the dining table, whispered conversations behind closed doors, and the way they flinched whenever I entered a room. They thought they were being discreet. They thought I was still that naive daughter, the overlooked sibling. But I wasn't. Not anymore. The first real crack came on a Thursday evening. My mother was in the study, phone pressed tightly against her ear. She spoke in a hushed tone, her back turned toward me. Normally, she'd close the door when scheming. But this time, in her haste, she hadn't. I don't care how much it costs, she hissed. Find someone who can make it disappear. If that will surfaces, everything we've built is gone. Her words hit me like a cold slap. She wasn't just complicit. She was actively working to erase the truth. And she had just confirmed what I had suspected all along. She knew about the original will. I froze in the hallway, careful not to make a sound. Every nerve in my body screamed to burst in, confront her, unleash the fury I'd been holding inside. But that would have been reckless. Instead, I retreated quietly, my mind racing. That was her mistake, her arrogance, her carelessness. For the first time, I had her words, her intent. Now all I needed was proof to back them. The following day, I visited the law firm that had handled my father's estate. The senior partner, Mr. Collins, was a man who valued discretion above all else. But he had known my father personally, and I suspected there was still loyalty buried under his polished professionalism. Mr. Collins, I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled, I need to ask you something directly. Did my father ever mention revising his will to favor David? He looked at me for a long time, his jaw tight. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Your father was a man of principles, Emily. He adored you. He believed you were the one with his true spirit. That's not an answer, I pressed. Mr. Collins hesitated, then lowered his voice. Your father signed a will, his final will, the week before he died. It left the majority of his estate to you, with provisions for your siblings. That document should have been the one read. But when David and your mother presented their version, it didn't match. My heart slammed against my ribs. Why didn't you say anything? Because, he said grimly, your mother threatened to ruin this firm. She had allies. Powerful ones. I was boxed in. I leaned forward, fire burning in my chest. Then help me now. Tell me where that will is. Mr. Collins closed his eyes for a moment, as though weighing a lifetime of choices. Finally, he opened a drawer and pulled out a small sealed envelope. I shouldn't be doing this, but your father wanted the truth to stand. I kept a copy hidden, waiting for the right moment. Emily, maybe you are that moment. I took the envelope, my fingers trembling. Inside was the smoking gun. Proof. As I walked out of his office, the city felt different, brighter. The weight I had been carrying for months lifted just slightly. I had what I needed to end them, but I also knew this was the most dangerous stage of all. Because once they realized the proof was in my hands, they wouldn't just try to silence me. They would destroy me. That night, I returned home with the envelope tucked safely inside my bag. My mother was waiting in the parlor, sipping tea like a queen who still thought she ruled her empire. You look tired, darling, she said smoothly. Though her eyes were sharp, I smiled back, matching her tone. Just busy, Mother. You know how it is. But inside, I was already plotting my next move. For months, I'd been clawing through shadows, desperate for a sliver of light. And now, in my hands, I held the truth. The question wasn't whether I would use it, it was how many lives it would shatter when I finally did. Holding that sealed envelope felt like clutching a detonator. It was small, light, ordinary, but inside it lay the clearest proof that could collapse everything my family had propped up. For months I'd crawled through shadows. Now I had a torch. I didn't rush. I never rush. The biggest mistake in any war is letting emotion outrun strategy. So I sat with the envelope for 2 days. I read and reread the will copy Mr. Collins had given me. I cataloged dates, notary stamps, signatures, everything a judge and a jury would want to see. I made 2 certified photocopies, hid the originals in a safety deposit box across town, and emailed encrypted backups to an account only I could access. Redundancy is sanity in an unstable house. Next, I built an audience. Public exposure is cruel, and it's precise. The right people, informed in the right order, will topple even the most entrenched lies. So, I mapped them. The firm's senior partner who respected the truth, the business associates who prized transparency, and a small legal journalist who loved a case where money met morality. I contacted each one carefully. No veiled threats. No dramatic speeches. Just facts, dates, and an offer. Look into this quietly. I will provide proof when I'm sure this can't be buried. At home, I performed for my family like a consummate actor. I smiled at dinner, poured wine for David, complimented my mother's table settings. They basked in their victory, oblivious to the iceberg beneath their heels. Their arrogance was a fuel I used like tinder. The first strike was surgical. I didn't send the will to the press. Instead, I handed a copy to an investor who'd been wavering about backing David's new expansion plan. I didn't accuse. I merely asked a question over coffee with a neutral expression. Have you seen the executed will? The one Mr. Harrison signed last spring? He admitted he hadn't, said he assumed David had the firm's future under control. A week later, a terse message landed in David's inbox from that investor. A polite withdrawal of tentative funds. A line about needing more transparency. The ripple I wanted began. Then I nudged my mother. Not with confrontation, that would alarm her, but with the appearance of frailty. I led a public fundraising gala approach where she'd be seated on the stage as a benefactor's widow. 2 nights before the event, I casually suggested she wear the pearl necklace Dad had left her. The pearls had sentimental value. David loved to see his mother polished and adored. She wore them. She loved the attention. At the gala, I positioned myself quietly among our community peers, smiling, sincere. Midway through, the benefactor's son, a man who'd been quietly interested in the firm's stability, came over and murmured, "Are you aware there's a pending question about the estate's handling?" I let the conversation float outward just enough for others to catch snippets. By the end of the night, conversations had shifted. The same people who'd toasted David earlier now asked small, pointed questions about board minutes, about fiduciary responsibility. I watched his smile go tight from across the room. He couldn't point to the source. He could only feel the pressure. Pressure reveals cracks. David began making mistakes. He started micromanaging, firing off angry emails, calling meetings to reassure stakeholders that everything was above board. That kind of panic becomes a record, an asset in the hands of a woman with proof. The decisive move came quietly, the way the best moves do. I arranged a voluntary audit under the guise of transparency for the family legacy. David agreed, smugly. He thought he could manage a shallow audit, brush it off with charm, and emerge unscathed. He didn't know I'd already fed the auditors the discrepancy notices and the handwriting expert's conclusion. I watched them pore over ledgers and notarized documents, watching their faces shift from doubt to concern. When the auditors requested corroboration for certain signatures and transfers, David could only stammer. He banged out explanations late into the night, but documents speak louder than nerves. The auditors asked for a meeting. They wanted to review original signed documents. If originals didn't match the forgeries, the law would begin to do its work. That morning, When my mother read the auditor's polite but pointed email, I saw the first real fear cross her face. She met my eyes across the breakfast table, and for a beat, she looked very small. She tried to recover. With flattery, with gaslighting words meant to pin me as the irrational, grieving daughter. "Anna, don't do anything foolish. This will tear the family apart." I smiled and reached for my coffee. "Do you want the truth, or do you want to keep living a lie?" My voice was calm. The room felt colder. David's hands clenched. They started to move publicly now, trying to influence the auditors, whispering to investors, making quiet calls. It was messy. It was exposed. The people they had counted on to preserve the illusion were stepping back because ambiguity had replaced certainty. And once certainty leaves, so does loyalty. I didn't celebrate. There's no joy in the unraveling of the people who raised you. There's only a hollow clarity, the knowledge that truth has a price, and sometimes you must be the one to pay it. The scale had begun to tip. The proof in my possession was no longer a threat. It was a lever. The world we'd known was tilting under our feet, and I was the hand that pulled. They said legacy is written in stone. But stone can be cracked, and next, I would pry that crack open so wide there'd be no going back. The morning after the auditor's request, I woke to the sound of raised voices. It wasn't unusual in our house, but there was a jagged edge to this argument, something raw that pierced even the heavy oak doors of the study. I crept down the hallway, careful with each step. "We can't let them see it." David's voice, strained, furious. "They already know too much," my mother snapped back. "You should have destroyed it months ago." "Don't you dare put this on me," he hissed. "You wanted the power just as much as I did." My pulse raced. They were slipping, unraveling before my eyes. Panic had them by the throat, and panic makes people dangerous. I stepped away before they caught me listening, but the words echoed in my head. Destroyed it. What were they talking about? The ledgers? The original will? Proof that could still bury me along with them? That night, I locked my bedroom door. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was survival. The next day, the auditors returned. I positioned myself discreetly at the edge of the boardroom while David tried to charm them. He laughed too loudly, gestured too wildly, his usually smooth composure cracking like thin ice. "Of course, everything is accounted for," he said, sliding stacks of neatly bound documents across the table. "My father left us with clarity and purpose." But the auditors weren't smiling. They exchanged glances, flipping pages. "This signature," one of them said, tapping the page. "Do you have corroboration?" David froze. For a split second I saw it, the sheer terror in his eyes. My mother quickly leaned in, her hand resting on his, her smile icy. "Gentlemen, surely you don't mean to question the validity of a notarized document," but their doubt lingered. They were polite, yes, but resolute. They asked for originals again. Originals David couldn't produce. When the meeting ended, David stormed out, his face pale, his tie askew. My mother lingered, her eyes sweeping the room until they landed on me. There was no mask this time, just a glare that could cut through steel. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I found an envelope slid under my door. No sender, no message, just a single sheet inside. "Stop now, or regret it forever." The handwriting wasn't David's. It wasn't my mother's either. Which meant they'd begun reaching outside, pulling others into their spiral of fear. The realization chilled me. They weren't just trying to silence me anymore. They were ready to ruin me. But fear doesn't win wars. Strategy does. So I went to work. I called the journalist again, this time handing over the will's copy and the handwriting analysis. "Hold it for now," I said. "But if something happens to me, anything, you publish." Immediately. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. "Understood. I also contacted Mr. Collins. If you value my father's memory, keep a copy safe. Somewhere only you can reach," he agreed, solemn, his expression grave. I was building a fortress, not of walls, but of truth. Layers of protection so that no matter what they tried, the story wouldn't die with me. That night, the house was too quiet. My skin prickled with unease as I sat in my room, going over each move in my head. Suddenly, the door handle rattled. Once, twice, then silence. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Whoever it was walked away. I realized with a cold certainty that I wasn't safe under this roof anymore. But leaving would raise suspicion. And suspicion could accelerate their desperation, so I stayed, watching, waiting, because timing, I reminded myself, is everything. 2 days later, my patience bore fruit. I was walking past the garage when I heard David shouting on the phone. He stood near the back, his voice sharp. "Burn it," I said. "I don't care how. Just make sure no one ever finds it." I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. Burn what? The will? Evidence? If they destroyed it, my leverage would vanish. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "She's getting too close. If we don't act, she'll ruin us both." They weren't just fighting to keep their empire anymore. They were plotting to erase me. And I knew, if I didn't strike first, I might not live to tell this story. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and dust, the kind of place where secrets had been locked away for years. I sat across from Mr. Thompson, the family attorney who had known my parents since before I was born. His silver-rimmed glasses glinted under the soft light as he carefully unfolded the final page of my father's will. My heart hammered in my chest. This was the moment, the truth about the inheritance, the reason my brother had schemed, lied, and pushed me to the edges of despair. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his voice steady but grave. "Your father's estate was complicated, but he was very clear about his intentions. He wanted both of his children cared for equally, unless one acted in bad faith." My breath caught. Those words, bad faith. They were everything. I leaned forward, gripping the armrest of the chair. "What do you mean?" The lawyer's eyes flicked toward me, and for a moment, I thought I saw pity. "Your brother, Michael, he tried to tamper with the documents years ago. It seems he wanted sole control over the property, the investments, and the family trust. But your father anticipated this." I felt a chill creep up my spine. My father knew. He knew what Michael was capable of. All those times I felt alone in the storm. Maybe I wasn't as abandoned as I believed. Mr. Thompson slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "Your father left this for you. His words, not mine." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. The handwriting inside was familiar, bold and confident, the same that had once signed my report cards and scrawled notes for me before school. "To my daughter, I know you've carried burdens that weren't yours to bear. Michael has always been ambitious, but there's a line between ambition and cruelty. This estate will never reward betrayal. If you are reading this, it means truth has finally prevailed. I leave you what is rightfully yours. Use it with wisdom, and never let anyone steal your worth again." The room blurred as tears filled my eyes. Not weakness, relief. For the first time in years, I felt the weight begin to lift. But Michael wasn't done. Oh no, if I knew him, and I did, he wouldn't surrender. Not when the power and money he thought belonged to him were slipping through his fingers. Mr. Thompson handed me the official documents detailing the split. Every asset, every account, every property. "He can contest it in court, but it won't matter," the lawyer said. "Your father's wording is airtight. You're protected." I should have felt safe, but all I felt was the familiar burn of war. That night, Michael called me. His voice was venom wrapped in silk. "You think you've won, don't you? That letter, that pathetic lawyer, they don't change anything. This family was mine to control. Dad trusted me, not you." I swallowed hard, steadying my breath. "No, Michael. Dad trusted both of us. You're the one who broke that trust." He laughed, a sound colder than winter. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. The will may be against me, but people can be bought. Judges, witnesses, even lawyers. You think paper protects you? You think Dad's words are stronger than me?" As he spoke, I realized something chilling. He wasn't just angry, he was desperate. And desperation makes dangerous men reckless. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling, but my mind sharper than ever. Michael was planning something bigger, something beyond legal battles. He wouldn't let the will be the end of it, and that was fine. Because neither would I. The inheritance was more than money. It was justice, validation, a weapon in my hands. For years he had stripped me of power, painted me as weak. But now I held the truth, the law, and my father's voice. Michael thought this was his final game. But he didn't realize it was mine. Michael may have lost in the lawyer's office, but battles don't always end on paper. When desperation drives him to one last dangerous move, I'll be forced to risk everything, my freedom, my safety, and maybe even my soul, to end this war once and for all. His laugh over the phone had been a warning. The silence that followed was a roar. I could feel the air change in the house the moment he hung up, the way the room seemed thinner, as if someone had cut the support beams and the whole place might collapse. Michael's desperation wasn't polite anymore. It wasn't legal threats or boardroom posturing. It was raw animal, and it had teeth. 2 nights later, my mailbox held a plain envelope. No return address. Inside, one photograph, taken from a distance, of me leaving Mr. Collins's office. Someone had watched me. Someone had followed me. The back of the photo had a single line, typed and cold. "We see you. Stop now." My hands went numb, but my pulse kept up a steady drumbeat of fury beneath it. This was beyond bluster. This was intimidation. And intimidation, left unchecked, becomes action. I called Mr. Collins first. I wanted to make sure the fortress I had started building had reinforcements. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight. "Do not go anywhere alone," he said without preamble. "Lock your accounts. Change your routines. And Emily, document everything. Every person, every car, every time you see something unusual." It was terse. It was panic-dusted with professional calm. He knew what this kind of thing led to. Next, I tightened my circle. The journalist I'd trusted met me in a diner and slid a paper across the table. A list of contacts, security consultants, a private investigator who specialized in corporate smear campaigns, an attorney who handled harassment escalation. "If they're going to play dirty," she said, "we need to be smarter." So I became smarter. I hired a PI discreetly, someone who used a different name and a different number. He trailed the cars that had been parked near my apartment, took license plates, and found a pattern. One of them registered through a local temp agency, the same agency that had recently placed an assistant at my brother's firm. Coincidence? Maybe, but the thread was there. When I confronted Michael across from our mother at Sunday dinner, deliberately public, deliberately slow, I let the photo lay between my plate and the silverware like a stone. He flushed a little, then composed himself with practiced ease. "We should all be careful in public," he said blandly, watching for reaction. "These people cause trouble because they think chaos benefits them." I smiled with the sweetness of someone who has already documented the lie. "If anyone's causing trouble, it's the person trying to buy loyalty and erase truth," I said, letting my voice stay low and even. Heads turned. Forks stilled. The room filled with the kind of silence that rearranges reputations. That night, I changed the locks. I changed passwords. I sent encrypted copies of everything to 3 different lawyers and the journalist. I set up cameras, small, legal, and visible in the corners of my property, to ensure any trespassers would be on record. I told Mr. Collins where I'd hidden the original will. I told the journalist how to publish at the first sign that anything untoward happened to me. I acted as if every step I took was being photographed, not because I feared being watched, but because I wanted to make certain that if anything did happen, the world would see the hands that reached for me. Michael's next move was uglier than a single envelope. He tried to manufacture a narrative. Within 48 hours, someone leaked an anonymous email to a few of our community's conservative blogs. It painted me as unstable, a grieving daughter using a legal technicality to claw for power. The language was precise, designed to prey on sympathies, emotional, grasping, not fit to lead. A smear campaign, surgical and cheap. I expected the blow to hurt. It did. For a moment, I felt the old tremor of insecurity. but I had been sharpening myself on harder things for months. I responded not with selfies or tears, but with evidence. I sent corrected timelines to the journalist. I released the dates, the emails, the notarized copies. I set the stage so the smear would appear petty next to the facts. The real turning point came 3 days later when my PI called with a name. One of the temp agency accounts was a shell used by a small security company. The same security company had a contract with the charity gala, where David had last been publicly humiliated. The trail led back to a middleman who had ties to a minor legal firm where Michael had placed several favors months ago. The pattern was ugly and familiar. Hire the shadow, push the smear, intimidate the threat. Armed with that, Mr. Collins filed a motion, not to sue yet, but to compel document disclosure and for a temporary restraining order. The judge granted it within a week when presented with the evidence, photos, anonymous threats, and a history of tampering. Michael was ordered to cease any contact, and his legal team scrambled with the kind of defensive fury reserved for cornered beasts. It didn't stop him from trying. For a fleeting, dangerous moment, I felt the truth and fear clicking like a lock behind me. He hired lawyers, paid whispers to PR people, tried to buy testimonials. He even attempted to challenge the handwriting analysis, insisting on another expert. But every attempt he made pushed more light into the room. People who had stood silent because of money began to step back. Those whose loyalty had been lukewarm found moral oxygen in the cold facts. The battle had left scars, on my sleep, on my trust, on the way I now watched the street. But something else had shifted too. Power, which had been a word whispered by others, now hummed in my palm. I was no longer only defending what my father had written. I was defending my right to exist in the place my father had imagined for me. He thought fear would make me small. Instead, it made me dangerous. But even as I closed in, I knew the next move would be the one to decide everything. And he would make it without mercy. By the time winter's edge crept into the air, the fight wasn't about documents anymore. It was about control. Michael's lawyers stalled hearings, his PR team flooded social feeds with curated half-truths, and whispers grew in country clubs and boardrooms where his influence still lingered. But behind the chatter, something else was happening. His grip was slipping. The temporary restraining order against him became the quiet noose he didn't anticipate. Every step he took, every attempt to intimidate or manipulate, now had a shadow of legal consequence. The PI in Collins's office logged every infraction, a burner call traced back to a known associate, a car lingering too long on my street, a chance encounter with a family friend at the grocery store. Each entry tightened the narrative of harassment, and yet, Michael didn't stop. He couldn't. One night, I arrived home to find the front door slightly ajar. My breath stalled as I scanned the hallway. Nothing looked broken, nothing was missing. But on the kitchen counter, a single object sat, my father's old fountain pen. It had been locked in a desk drawer, in a room no one but family ever entered. My skin prickled cold. This wasn't theft, it was a message. I can still reach you. I called the police immediately. They dusted for prints, filed the report, and promised extra patrols. But I knew Michael was too careful to leave a fingerprint. This was psychological warfare, and in his arrogance he thought it would break me. Instead, I filed it into evidence. Each scare tactic was now another nail in his coffin. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I wrote, documenting every incident, cross-referencing every date, building a timeline so airtight it would suffocate him. Collins called me in the morning after reading my notes. His voice carried a rare mix of approval and grim satisfaction. "Emily," he said, "you've built more than a defense. You've built a case that could end his career. If we drop this file in the right court, he won't just lose the inheritance battle. He'll lose everything." I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt the weight of something heavier. Ending Michael wasn't just about reclaiming the will. It meant permanently dismantling the man who had stood at the center of our family for decades. The journalist called later that afternoon. "When this breaks," she said, "the public won't see you as some grieving daughter. They'll see you as the one who stopped him. People are hungry for stories where the bully doesn't win." Her words sank in, but they also sharpened my fear. Public victory paints a target as much as it paints a halo. Michael had already proven he'd trespass, stalk, smear. What would he do when his empire cracked for good? The answer came quicker than I expected. The very next morning, Collins received a subpoena. Michael's team was counterattacking, demanding depositions from me, Collins, even the journalist. They wanted to drain us, exhaust us, bury us in procedure, but they didn't anticipate what I had in reserve. Before the week ended, my PI uncovered something devastating. Michael had funneled money through offshore accounts to pay for the smear campaign. Wire transfers, fake invoices, shell corporations, meticulous but traceable. And more importantly, illegal. I stared at the folder the PI handed me. For the first time in this entire war, I didn't just have evidence to protect myself. I had evidence that could end him. The question clawed at me in the silence of my apartment. Was I ready to push the final domino? Because once I did, there was no walking back. He wanted to bleed me dry with lawyers and shadows. Instead, I found the one truth that could burn his empire to ash. But exposing it meant stepping into a fire that might consume us both. The folder sat on my lap like a loaded weapon. Offshore accounts, fake invoices, shell corporations so neatly arranged, yet so obviously criminal once the threads were pulled. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was fraud, laundering, the kind of thing that put people in prison for decades. I stared at the papers until the ink seemed to blur. For years, Michael had built himself into this untouchable figure, the one who pulled strings while the rest of us danced. But here it was, the loose thread that unraveled everything. Collins reviewed the documents with a rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips. This is it. The leverage we needed. We hand this over to the feds, and Michael won't be walking into a courtroom as the plaintiff. He'll be dragged in as a defendant. My chest tightened. And what about me? You'll be seen as the whistleblower, Collins said simply. The sister who not only resisted his manipulation but exposed his crimes. It'll change everything. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Because I knew Michael. If he sensed the ground crumbling beneath him, he wouldn't go quietly. Sure enough, 2 nights later, my phone lit up with his number. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was low, strangled, almost feral. You think you've beaten me? You think you're clever? None of this will stick. I'll bury you in appeals. I'll drag you through hell before I let you take what's mine. I gripped the phone tighter, my voice steady even as my hands shook. It was never yours, Michael. You built your empire on lies, and lies always collapse. Silence. Then a laugh, a hollow, broken sound. You're just like Dad, always doubting me, always siding against me. But let me make one thing clear, Emily. If I go down, I'll make sure you burn with me. He hung up before I could answer. I sat there in the dark, the weight of his threat pressing against my chest. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Because this time, I wasn't playing defense. The next morning, I handed the file over to the authorities. Federal agents moved swiftly, freezing accounts, seizing records, and preparing charges. By the afternoon, the whispers had started. Business partners distancing themselves, old allies vanishing into the shadows, and then came the headline. Prominent businessman under federal investigation for fraud and money laundering. His photo was plastered across every screen, the mask of power stripped away. I should have felt relief watching the empire crumble, but instead I felt something heavier, a strange mix of justice and grief. Because beneath all the corruption, all the cruelty, he was still my brother. That night, I sat in the same chair where I had once read my father's final letter. I held it in my hands again, the words steadying me. Never let anyone steal your worth. I whispered it aloud, as if speaking directly to my father. I didn't, Dad, not this time, but I knew it wasn't over. Michael wasn't the type to vanish quietly. And if his words were true, if he meant to drag me into the fire with him, then the hardest part of this war was still to come. His empire was collapsing, his name tarnished, his accounts frozen. But in his rage, Michael wasn't just fighting for money anymore. He was fighting for revenge. And I knew his next move wouldn't be in a courtroom. It would be personal. The night was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your chest, waiting, daring you to breathe. I had triple-locked my doors, checked the windows twice, and kept the phone on the table beside me. Still, I knew Michael wouldn't let it end in silence. It came at 2 a.m., the sharp crack of glass breaking in the back room. My heart jolted, but my body was ready. I grabbed the small canister of pepper spray I'd kept near me for weeks, and with my other hand, I dialed 911, leaving the line open. I moved quietly through the hallway, the hardwood cool beneath my bare feet. And then I saw him, Michael, disheveled, his once perfect suit rumpled, eyes bloodshot, face twisted with desperation. He wasn't the man from glossy magazine covers or boardroom negotiations anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. "You ruined me," he hissed, stepping closer, shards of glass still clinging to his jacket. "Everything I built, everything I deserved, you took it all." I steadied my breath. "No, Michael. You destroyed yourself. You used Dad's love, this family's trust, like tools. And when they broke, you blamed everyone but yourself." He laughed, but the sound cracked. "Don't you dare lecture me. You were nothing without me. Weak, invisible. And now you think you're some kind of hero? No. You'll go down with me, tonight." His hand shifted. I saw the glint of metal. A knife. My stomach lurched, but my grip on the spray tightened. I stepped back slowly, buying time. "I'm not weak, Michael," I said, my voice low, steady. "Not anymore. And I'm not afraid of you," he lunged. The next moments blurred into instinct. I sprayed directly into his face, the searing mist forcing a guttural scream from his throat. He stumbled, dropping the knife, clawing at his burning eyes. I kicked the blade across the floor just as red and blue lights flashed through the windows. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" The door burst open, officers flooding the room. Within seconds, Michael was on the ground, handcuffed, still cursing my name. I stood frozen, my whole body trembling as they dragged him away. For years, I had imagined justice in so many forms: legal victories, financial wins, even public humiliation. But nothing compared to that moment. Watching him leave my house not as the brother who once ruled over me, but as a criminal stripped bare. Hours later, as dawn broke, I sat by the window, the first light painting the world gold again. My hands still shook, but inside, something had shifted. The fear that had lived in my bones for years was gone. Michael was finished. I picked up my father's letter once more, whispering the words that had carried me through every battle. "Never let anyone steal your worth. This time," I added my own, "and never let them steal your peace." For the first time in years, I believed both. The inheritance war was never just about money. It was about power, about reclaiming my voice, about proving that cruelty doesn't win forever. My brother tried to break me, but in the end, his empire fell, and I finally rose. Sometimes the deepest revenge isn't destroying someone's fortune, it's watching them crumble under the weight of their own choices. And that's exactly what happened to my brother.